Hello and welcome back to Down the Slope. I'm Ewan. We've got a full house of us, but we're not really too interested in us tonight. We are joined by Hibs manager Lee Johnson and Chief Executive Ben Kensell. How are you doing, guys?
Very good, thank you. Thanks very much for inviting us. Well, I'm not sure I wasn't. Well, originally it was supposed to be Ben, and somehow I'm in. So I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for allowing me to be in.
I figured it was better that you had two for the sort of option of one, and Lee's just got a lot more to say than I have. So I think it's probably easier for all parties.
Good. Obviously, Ben, we spoke about around about this time last year as well. But Liam's going to kick starters off, and Liam's the only one that I'm interested in asking how he is, because congratulations are very much in order on the most recent Hibs Da and the first of the podcast. How you doing, Liam, after becoming a father?
It's been a good experience actually. The last 4 or 5 days been remarkably straightforward. I'm feeling quite smug about it. So I dare say it only gets more difficult and more challenging from this point onwards. But thank you for the congratulations, and thanks to everyone who sent a really nice message today. I appreciate it. Your warm wishes are well appreciated. So I'll lead us off with the first question, if that's okay, Ben. And this one's to you, and it's reflecting back on the conversation that we had with yourself back in February of last year. And at the time, I think there was a sentiment from yourself that there was no disadvantage or advantage of having a sporting director in place. I think you said, at the club the size of Hibs, as a CEO, you can have a foot in either camp, and it's a very manageable size. What has changed over the course of the last 12 months for you to now look at the structure again at Hibs and looking at putting a sporting director or director of football role in place?
Firstly, congratulations on the new arrival from your end. So
thank you.
Been there twice myself. It only gets worse. So if you think you're having a good time now, then let's see what it's like when with a more sleepless nights. Look, I think for results ultimately drive kind of different views on things. I think it's been well documented that our recruitment hasn't been good enough, and therefore I think there's an element of ensuring that if we're going to do things the right way, we've got to get the right structure in place moving forward to make sure that we maximise the sort of budgets that are available. So in terms of the role itself, I don't really see my role necessarily changing too much, because director of football has to report in. So it's very much a kind of hand on the tiller of especially the finances more than anything. But yeah, still getting the direction from the owner as well. So I think bringing someone in of that kind of caliber to oversee all of the different departments is a good thing, and something that I'm familiar with. So yeah.
Do you have any regrets, Ben, about the transfer committee that was put in place a year ago? There still seems to be within the fan base a considerable amount of confusion around what that transfer committee is and what it does. Is that something that you put in place that maybe looking back now perhaps wasn't the right model?
I think you'd have to ask the owner ultimately on that. No, I think ultimately when you look at most transfers or most bits of business that are done, it's done by a collective. It's not done by one individual. And I think this is where there has to be a completely different focus from a fan base, where they sort of try and pin a signing on an individual. I just think that's just simply not the case in football these days. There are so many people involved, and Lee can speak more to this. There's so many people involved with scouting, recruiting, bringing a player, around their fit in general. So I don't think there are many clubs that don't have a form of committee that is therefore making them decisions. But ultimately, the manager has the final decision on any player that's brought into the club. You want to make sure that you have stability around who that manager is. This club hasn't had enough stability around that, and therefore some of the mistakes that are made are as a result of that. Some of the mistakes are made by giving the manager too much autonomy and allowing that manager to sort of just go out and get their own players. But equally, I think the committee in itself, this isn't about one individual making a decision. This is about a collective of people that are looking after different interests within the football club, but with the single interest and collective interest of making sure that we are the best version of ourselves as a club, so we can deliver against the sporting objectives.
Thank you.
Just on recruitment, obviously the summer transfer window was a bit mad with a lot of incomings. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on how successful you think the window was, and also your overall rating of said window.
Well, I think firstly, it's probably easier for Lee to answer the summer business because Lee was in post. So the beauty of what I think we did was we made sure that we had a manager that could come in and actually hit the ground running and actually have their own sort of management team in place way before, well, even before pre-season started. So so it's probably for Lee to answer around kind of the transfer window in general because it's one that he can control.
Yeah, I thought it was, if I'm honest, mixed. You know, I think there's some good signings in there. You know, likes of Dave Marshall. Has been excellent for us. You know, showed that leadership quality. I think the context behind it now, looking back, I think we had 7 players going into the window injured, and obviously that was an important factor, particularly because instantly in this division up here is obviously you've got the League Cup to play for, which is competitive, like right from the start. But I looked at the squad originally. I felt we had far too many players, and certainly in hindsight probably would have reduced the quantity of signings and tried to increase the quality, which is, I believe, exactly what we've done in this window to sort of react, if you like, from the decisions that were made in the first window. And I think just working together with everybody now stands us in good stead. You know, recruitment team know exactly what I want from a player or the type of player that I'm going to pick, if you like, moving forward. I think at times we had a bit of a malaise around the training ground when you've got, like I say, 52 players from development squad to first team. It's too many. And, you know, these guys, we've managed to move 12 out in this window already and potentially 1 or 2 more to crack on with their careers, really. You know, if there's no opportunity to play or to play in the first team, it can get really frustrating for players, and sometimes that can lead to an environment that's not absolutely perfect. So I think we've been really decisive in this window and really bold, and there's no doubt, going back to your original question, some good signings. You know, Miko as an example from the City group, I thought was an excellent signing and one that steps into it. Would I have made the same decisions again, or would we have? Potentially not. But I think, like I say, the context is there based on wanting to hit the ground running for the start, also wanting to fulfill the owner's dream of a lot of young players. And I think that we've got ourselves into that position now where we're genuinely ready to grow in terms of developing young players that can step in terms of reducing the quantity of the squad and increasing that quality from within. So it's really clear and concise, if you like, moving forward. And I'll accept that we definitely didn't make every decision correct. But again, there's always context to each individual decision, as well as having to work extremely diligently to a budget that is obviously not one of the biggest in the division.
Yeah, just before we move on, can I get a rating from you on this summer transfer window?
I don't mind give you a rating. I'll give you 2 ratings, one for the summer and one for the January one. So I'll give us a summer one as a 5, and I'll give us a 9 for the January one.
Perfect, thank you, Lee.
Hi, Lee and Ben. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Interesting to hear you talking about the younger players there. So I'm going to touch on the development squad that was put together in the summer there. So we signed a lot of players and put together a squad that have only averaged a game and a half a month. And as a result of that, no players directly came from that into the first team. Would you say that has been a successful strategy?
Well, I think firstly, the development team has allowed our young players to play men's football in the reserve league. I think we had an option to go into the potential Lowland League, and the cost was too prohibitive. And we've knocked on the door of a Rangers, Celtic and a Hearts, and we've sort of said to them, how much does that actually cost you? And it's cost them a lot of money to go into the Lowland League because of the requirements around players. Ultimately, it's a separate league. So it's governed by a separate set of parameters. So the best that we could have hoped for was a reserve league that we lobbied for, and we managed to get in place, which is good. We wanted the Challenge Cup to be something that we would go far in. We also wanted the games program of having teams come up and us go down to be able to marry them games to get to an optimum level of about 25, and that was something that we always wanted to get to. I think the success of our youth team is something that should be heralded, not criticised. And as a result of the development team and the structure that we put around it, with Steve Keane, Gareth Evans, Daz McGregor coming in there, I think the coaching they've got, I think the game time experience that they've got has been vital for them. And I also think the UEFA Youth League, whilst it's been an absolute kind of roller coaster and a fantastic kind of thing that we've done, it's also allowed us to sort of showcase the talent that we have got at the age group that it's in. So I think you can look at it in two different ways. You can look at it and say, has it been a success? Well, undoubtedly it has, because of the talent that's been produced and been harnessed as a result of it. Or you could say, well, have the signings of some of the signings towards the development team been successful? You would say no, some of them haven't been, because some of our younger players have pushed them out and allowed their talents to flourish. So I think you can look at it in lots of different ways, depending on whether you're glass half full or glass half empty.
Can I just touch on that a little bit as well? I think there's probably more games go on than you guys realise. Just for an example, like Friday, we had an in-house game where Ethan Laidlaw was joined by the first team squad, as an example. Malik played in that, Kanayo played in that, Murray Johnson played in that. Do you know what I mean? So another example is Manchester City have rang me and said, look, we like your under 16, 17 group. Can we have a fixture here, because we think we've got a top under 18s, because we want to challenge ourselves and have a game against you guys. So there's all these things, if you like, going on in the background. Brentford game was actually cancelled twice due to the weather conditions in and around, and travel conditions in and around the difficult spell we had in December. So there's actually more goes on often than gets publicised. And we're really, like I say, we're really strong on that 25 games per season. A lot of our boys have been out on loan, the likes of Alan Delafiere as an example, to Edinburgh City, and got good numbers of games there. And it's only really the injured ones that haven't been able to fulfil or will be able to fulfil by the end of the season that 25 game marker. And we're actually in the process currently of doing that games audit all the way through, from under 14s all the way up, of which is going to be delivered back to me all the way through. So whether that's from 14 years old all the way through to the first team, international games, because sometimes you forget that, you know, we've got a lot of internationals in our academy, and that takes up games, and that sometimes gets games cancelled because you can't fulfill the fixtures. You're pushing boys out on loan because you feel that development time is best served in men's football. We're at a stage now with these boys where we've been withheld really from putting them out on loan because of this European competition that's gone so well. So they've probably missed the potential of 4 or 5 games. And I name drop players like Josh O'Connor as an example, Jacob Blaney. You know, these guys are ready now for men's football. They're done with youth football. It was a lovely ending to a lovely period for the club. But now, if you like, the real work starts in the men's game, and this gives us the opportunity still to loan a few of these guys out until the end of Feb.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. And obviously I want to continue by putting some praise onto the youth team and the progress that they made in Europe. Obviously getting the tie with Dortmund, which was a good game, and it was good to see a lot of fans there. So with that, does the priority now become tying some of these talented youngsters down to longer term deals at the club?
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, there should be announcements soon coming out. That process isn't easy, like it isn't easy with any kind of senior players either. But no, there is good progress, which you'll hear about in the coming days. That's great. Thanks, guys.
Hi guys, I'll jump in now. I've got a couple of questions each for you, Ben. I'll come to you first. Obviously, we've had quite a bit of change up in the managerial spot in the last year and a half or so. So just looking back to when Jack Ross and Sean Maloney were sacked, what was kind of the thinking that led to that decision actually being made and the axe being swung as such? each of those sackings?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Jack, it's never easy because of what Jack achieved at the club. Ultimately, results are what people want to see. They want to see Hibs winning football matches, but they also want to see a Hibs team playing in an attractive attacking style. And I think it was felt very, very clearly by the fan base on that night in Livingston that it had become quite untenable actually between the fan base and the management team. And I felt really sad actually that it had deteriorated to that level when we'd sort of reached a cup final. But ultimately, then results have been coming, haven't they? And there've been no real sign of change. And it's never easy when you're removing a manager. But managers know that the results are probably the most important thing, especially to a fan base where there is naturally high expectation from the size of the club that we are. And yeah, that was the reasoning behind that. When it came to Sean, I genuinely believe that that any manager deserves more time than Sean received and got. But ultimately, I actually believe that the decision from a board perspective, because remember, it is a collective decision. It's not just an arbitrary individual that goes, do you know what? I think we should make a change. I think it was felt that Sean and the management team had got to a point where the players themselves and the style and the philosophy and the way that the direction the club was heading in wasn't the direction that the board wanted. And by removing the management team at that point in time, it allowed us the opportunity to reset. And the timing of that is always easier when you're heading into the back end of a season, and you can then make an appointment with not time being the consideration, and you get the right person that can come in and actually hit the ground running from a pre-season onwards. So I think both of them had slightly different circumstances around it, but ultimately it comes back to performances and results, and both weren't good enough, and both have accepted that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And this was a question I'd had written down before Lee was actually confirmed of coming on. So apologies if this is an awkward one to answer. But obviously a lot of candidates I'm sure would have been interested.
It won't be awkward.
Would have been interested in the job. And then obviously Lee's now at the club and at the helm. What was it that made Lee stand out as a candidate? And then obviously we did have that tough run of form where I think we can all collectively agree wasn't good enough. So what made Lee exempt from the sacking, which in my opinion was debatably on a par with some of the results that Sean Maloney saw during his final spell at the club, or his final time at the club.
Yeah, so there was a few questions in there, but what I'll pick up is why Lee. Yeah, was the first one.
Yeah, that was why. Yeah.
Yeah, so ultimately, what Lee managed to demonstrate. One, I'm aware of obviously football down south and Lee's record. And anyone that is the age that Lee is and has managed the amount of games that he's had in a very, very, very competitive league that's sometimes hugely money orientated in terms of dictating where your results sit or your performances are. What Lee had managed to achieve over a protracted period of time at a few clubs was really impressive. The style of football was always quite open, quite attacking. But also, I think he'll be the first to admit he also took a few hidings, as managers do when you play in quite an open, expansive way. That sometimes you're gonna get on the wrong side of one of them. But we'd rather kind of be in a position where we try to entertain, try and brought some attacking kind of open football back, which is what we felt that was needed. He'd also acted very well in the transfer market in terms of buying and selling. And the judgment around him and his recruitment teams was that he had done a very good job at the clubs that he'd been at. If you look at the job he'd done at Sunderland before being removed, I think unfairly, I believe that they were third, 3 points off top. Yes, they just had a heavy defeat to Bolton, but ultimately at that point he'd assembled a team during the January window, which would eventually go on under Alex, is another manager that I know, to go on and get promotion. And let's make no bones about that. That was assembled by Lee and the management team of Macca, Lee, and everyone that was there, and I'm sure his recruitment team. So, you know, when you see things like that, managers, you don't understand the circumstances necessarily, but he was definitely an attractive kind of candidate. But there were others as well, like, because it's a massive job and it's a good job to have. So that's why Lee. What was the next one? The next one was
sorry. So the second part was
why didn't we remove him?
Sorry, what was that?
The next one was why didn't we remove him? Basically,
essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, because throughout that period, I genuinely believed that the transition that the club was going on, and it's not just my belief, it's other people's beliefs as well, is that if we continue to show a kind of a sliding door, a swinging door to managers, how can you potentially build something over a much more longer term period when it comes to stability and growth? Throughout that period, before that period of unacceptable results, wouldn't necessarily say performances at times, but unacceptable results. Let's just remember, before that point, we had very acceptable results. At the beginning of the season, I thought we did well. We also felt that there was a period of time where there was some bedding in that was needed. There was some injuries thrown in there to Martin and to a few others that we felt were unfortunate, outside of his control. And I think it comes down to belief and the relationship that I've got with Lee, and I'd like to think the relationship he's got with myself and the club. You know, we always felt that we were close. From a data perspective, we were close, and we always felt that we deserved more points than we actually got during that period of time. So we sat down, we had a discussion. We were very fraught with each other because we know that it's a results-based business, but I don't think we've ever really questioned whether it was the right thing to do. As a board or as an individual or as a collective, Lee and I, and hopefully we've been proven right. And you know, whilst we've had two disappointing results, I would say against Hearts, massively disappointing. What I would say is that there are objectives that we have at the club, in the league and in the cup competitions, and if we continue in the same vein like we're doing, then we'll achieve one of the objectives in the league. So yeah, that's probably why.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that. I know that's not the easiest question to answer, but Lee, one for you. Being honest, the thing that's impressed me most since you've joined the club is the development of Josh Campbell. I think that realistically, we're all guilty on the pod of last season thinking he was one of the fringe players at the club, and if the season ended today, he would get my vote for Player of the Year. Was there something that you helped develop in his game that kind of got him to the level that he's playing at now?
Well, firstly, I think all credit certainly goes to Josh. You know, he's been fantastic in terms of a student, but he's also, you know, fought through that adversity. I think he felt that from the fan base, in terms of, yes, he was a good young player and yes, he was supported, but he wanted to step into being a really key player. He had a brilliant pre-season. You know, he's fit as a fiddle in terms of it physically, and he got the opportunity and he started scoring and impacting the games early on in the season. And he's just been one that's been really trusted. I think we trust him, he trusts us, and we have worked hard on him. But again, it all comes down to the individual and their ability to learn and their ability to implement. You know, recently we've been speaking a lot to him about that composure. I see him maybe quite differently to the previous manager. I think the previous manager saw him as like a deep line midfielder. I see him as a player that sort of box to box, makes those corner flag runs, as we call them, almost has less touches, but more potent touches in the final third. And that's just difference in style and managers. But I think certainly Josh has enjoyed that role. You know, he's combative in the middle, like, with the likes of Nizzy as well, needs runners around him. You know, all of our strikers really that we have in the 9 need that sort of movement and ability to be able to disrupt the back line through somebody else's movement. So I think he's done extremely well. You know, obviously it was quite well publicised that we had bids for him in this window, and we're looking to, like I say, build around players like that, and I think he'll only get better, and I'm really looking forward to working with him over the period of his contract.
Cheers, guys.
Ben, just one more quick question for you, because you've touched on collaboration a couple of times and making decisions collaboratively, both in terms of recruitment and in terms of boardroom decisions around managers. I'm just wondering, how do you personally as CEO get the balance right between individuals being held accountable and just good corporate governance in terms of our decision making being really, really clear on who's on the hook for what?
It's a really good question. It's a really difficult balance. I won't lie on that. With them, we obviously have a board of directors, and Ron is a key decision maker and as the owner of the football club. I think from my perspective, I have loyalty to the staff, loyalty to the manager that we bring in to try and support them in the best way possible, whilst also kind of being as honest as I can, and as a board we can, with results either not being good enough, and therefore making people aware that things need to improve as a result of that. So I think it's a really difficult balancing act to ensure that you do what's right for the club and for the fans, but also that you don't sort of compromise your relationship with the individual at the same time, because I want people to sort of all pull in the same direction and work for the common cause, which is to be the best version of that Hibs can be, because that's what the fans should expect as a minimum. It's one of the hardest balances that you can get, really. But there are obviously different strategic aims to what the board wish to have, and then the context around it is you're dealing with human beings that have emotions, and therefore that delicate balance between when to have them conversations is really important. And I mean with board members as well as kind of managers, as well as senior members of staff as well. It's everyone gets quite emotionally involved in football, and I understand that. And everyone, unfortunately, at this club over recent years has had to become incredibly thick-skinned and robust enough to take an awful lot of criticism, both personally and professionally. But it's part of the game, and we have to accept that if we haven't been good enough, then we should be criticised for it. But don't ever think that we're not discussing that at board level, or don't ever think that we're not having difficult conversations individually, because you'd be wrong, massively wrong, or any fan that thinks that would be wrong, because we all want to be successful, and we all want to, but we all want to make sure that the club can be the best version of itself, like I keep on saying.
Cool, thank you.
Ben, and to be honest yourself, there's maybe two questions here. If we could just go back to the potential upcoming director of football appointment. Ben, when are the support likely to sort of see an announcement? When are you hoping to have someone in place for, obviously, prior to the summer's transfer window and then beyond that? And then what is it you're sort of looking for in that role? And then for yourself, Lee, after that, obviously that's not a position that was potentially expected to be at the club when you took the job. How do you see that impacting maybe on your day-to-day and your role at the club?
I'll go first if you want. I think it's a good thing. I think I like to think I'm a modern manager, if you know what I mean, in terms of I've worked under sporting directors, under CEOs, different organisational structures. And I just want the best for the club as well. It's not all about me. I haven't got an ego in that sense. Like, we do need as much football nous as possible within this football club. And like, I'm a football man, and I like working with like quality practitioners, that love football and that ideally love Hibs and bring a real strong set of contacts, a set of sort of USP in their knowledge and where that sits. And this is a fantastic club, and anybody would be very, very lucky to work here. So it's key for me for what we're after. It's key that I'm very close with that individual in terms of we really form a very quick working relationship, because inevitably there'll be big decisions made over the summer, both in terms of incomings and outgoings. But it's not just that, it's getting an eye across the club, across the football side of it. And of course, my role in that will be to help them settle as quickly as possible and, pass on my knowledge on Hibs, but also share that contact base that I've got.
Thanks.
Cool. Okay, I'm glad you asked this question, because what it allows me to do is there's been some criticism around why do we not hear from the club? Why do we not hear from the club? And it's because I always believe that you should say something when there's something to be said, rather than just talk. So let me talk you through that whole process. So following the window, there was a review of the window. This is the summer one. And I think it was deemed at that point in time, with the budgets that we'd spent, that there was probably a different way that we'd like to look at. So I started to work on that process with the owner, on what that could look like, on what is familiar in football in terms of whether it's the head of recruitment, whether it's a director of football, whether it's a sporting director, what's the nuances between the two, all of these different things. Wanted to make sure that Lee was comfortable with it, and you've just heard the answer on that. And then at that point, you then position something to the board. That board meeting comes in sort of November time. And at that point, you then, once you have green light to sort of push forward with that, you then need to build things like candidate briefs. You then need to go to the market and make sure that you are absolutely certain around what the parameters are, with what that role sits. So one of the really important ones for us is that what we don't want a sporting director that comes in and tells our manager how to play football. That's not exactly, that's not the remit. That's not what we want. So we need to have these discussions before going live with any kind of appointment. What then happened is, obviously we had a tricky period, but actually I think there was so much noise around it that I felt that we needed to get it out there, albeit prematurely, because the January transfer window was a massive opportunity for us to do exactly what we said we would do, which is clear some of the players that we had off of the wage bill, create some space, bring in the quality over the quantity that we had probably brought in previously, right some of the wrongs or some of the challenges that we faced.
Can I say as well, also to not sell some of the players? Do you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of interest in our players. So when I labelled it a 9, I suppose there's a lot of information that I'd know that's maybe not out in the public, where the club have stood really firm and said, no, like, this is a player that we're building around. I think sometimes that gets lost in a transfer window. So not only am I really happy with the signings, I'm really happy with the players that we've got out to compact the squad a little bit more and make everybody just that little bit closer, if you like, to the action, and then to maintain the quality that we've got and to continue to work with those. And probably the extra point is probably the fact that we lost Porto, and is a very good player that I would have rather kept, but situations and circumstances meant that wasn't possible.
Yeah, so I think in terms of timing wise, we then had this very, very busy January window that we knew was pivotal. And it was pivotal for a couple of things. Yes, protecting the players that we wanted to keep at the club, removing some of them, bringing some quality in, but also to ensure that we position ourselves in the best possible way for the summer, so we can give a director of football and Lee as much opportunity to bring in the quality that we're going to need to compete and to continue to compete. So I think that focus on that window had to be the sole priority, which then allowed people to come naturally to us, to tell us that they were interested in the role, which they did in their numbers. And now we've built that candidate brief. We've got some interest in the role. We can now start having them kind of proper conversations that you need to have around what does the fit look like. So and then conversations have started already. We're at that kind of long list stage. It's a good list. I've already done the interview on what we're looking for, so I don't think I'll probably need to go over that so much. And Lee and I are across the candidates that could be available, and the board are across that as well. And there's a process put in place to ensure that we kind of bring that down to a really good, credible shortlist, and then appoint as soon as possible. But knowing full well that we've positioned them to have the best opportunity that we could have by solely concentrating on a January window and making sure we did as much as we possibly could.
No, thank you very much. I'm sure that will be interesting for everyone here. I think it would be a miss of us to say we have been very critical of the run of form maybe prior to the last week or so, and a lot of fans really had started to lose faith, if you like, with the current run of form and obviously the 2 derby defeats. Lee, what would be your message to those fans to try and get them, maybe back on board, or to sort of keep positive about what's left for the season?
I think firstly, I'd apologise. Like the run of form, like probably wasn't deserved, if I'm honest with you. Like in terms of, I think our performances, I go back to Dundee United away, which is where that started. It was worth a point at least. We've had a couple of VAR decisions go against the handball at Rangers. Some poor performances in there, like Ross County at home was a horror show. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to be honest with that. And the derby games like hurt us all. Do you know what I mean? And I get that. And obviously my rant after the Hearts away game has to be backed up. It has to be backed up with action. It has to be backed up with points. What I would say is I'm really proud of actually what we've done in terms of turning that round, having a good window. Like actually, we're 3rd in terms of the form table over the last 5 games, and actually 4th over the last 10 games in the league. So there's a level of consistency over those sort of 5 and 10 game period that we've actually come through and actually showed a fair bit of resilience, as a staff, as a group of players. And, for that to happen early in the tenure is actually much better, because it enables you to make really decisive decisions, to be really bold with the decision making, which I think we've done in that January period. And we've put ourselves in a position now where I suppose we've got just that little bit of credit back with the fans, just by the battling nature of our performances. Obviously the 6-0 win against Aberdeen. And I have to say, I think the fans have been brilliant, at the games. Of course, it's fair to show you sort of discontent with a performance at half-time or at the end of the game, but generally everybody's like supported the boys, supported me. I can't obviously control the uncontrollables in terms of social media and things like that, but I know full well that we work really, really well. Like I knew that it would turn and come good. Like it's been a challenge and a battle of a season, there's no doubt on that, but we've still got the opportunity to be really successful. I haven't lost 1 ounce of belief in terms of the club, the project, the fan base, where we're going to go. I just had more hurdles than I was expecting, if you like, when I would have done the fans forum on day one. And I think we're working through those from board level to structural level to playing style level to, like I say, bringing those young players through. And I think I've just continued to articulate the plan, which is reduce the quantity, increase the quality, and bring the young players through. And what was nice about last week is that we did have a good week of proving that that's what we're doing. And that was really enjoyable to battle through tough times, if you like, and be rewarded with a good points haul, 7 points in 9. And again, VAR's done us, in my opinion, for 9 and 3 clean sheets.
Yeah, no, I definitely personally agree with the last week. Ben, Lee, thank you very much for your time tonight. We've certainly enjoyed it, and hopefully the listeners have as well. In terms of Down the Slope, we will be back on Thursday with Up the Slope, and we've got Twitter Spaces on Wednesday night. But Lee and Ben, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.